Okay, hello everyone. Good morning. My name is Natalie and I'm a PCA at Beyond Barnard. So in today's recording, we're just going to be going over some cover letter best practices. We have the best practices series taking place currently, but this is for anyone who either cannot make the event or just wants to know some more about cover letter best practices straight from Beyond Barnard. So let's get started. So this is just kind of an overview of some of what Beyond Barnard offers beyond just cover letter or resume help. We also offer career development and funding opportunities, graduate and professional school assistance, as well as fellowship and campus roles assistance. And then there are some key figures below in case you want to take a look before we get started into the actual presentation. Okay, so as I mentioned, we have a series taking place right now. So we just had our resumes best practices event, and we have the community building and the interviews and cover letters events coming up as well. So if you are interested in any of these events, we recommend attending to get to know some more about the best practices that correspond to each of these topics. But as I mentioned, today we will be talking about cover letters specifically. So as we say here, connect the dots, structure, content, questions. Those are kind of the things we're going to be going over today. Okay, so by the end of this presentation, we hope that these will be some of the takeaways, that we will learn how to structure our letters in an effective way to build confidence in our professional writing, deploying better and more natural language to describe your experience and skills, and thinking more critically about the challenge that a cover letter presents. Okay, and then this is kind of the biggest takeaway of all. In case some of the other information gets lost, this is kind of the take-home point. Cover letter should not merely restate your resume. I think that's one of the biggest key points that we will be talking about today. It is not just a copy and paste of your resume, but it's going into depth a little bit more. As it says here, they are an opportunity to demonstrate not only the strong writing skills that you have developed, but also to show that you've done specific homework. And what that means is your research, your networking in relation to the organization or the role that you're applying for. And this is all going to become a little bit more clear as we go on into the presentation. And then here are some common misconceptions that we're going to debunk and we're going to talk through in this presentation. The first one is that no one reads cover letters. Common misconception. People actually do read cover letters, whether you think or you do not. The next one right here is employers will read cover letters before they read my resume. Employers will read both my cover letter and my resume. A cover letter restates the resume, but in prose form, and cover letters don't need to be customized. So as we mentioned with the resume, a cover letter isn't just a copy and paste of your resume, just in word or sentence format. As we will learn, it actually goes a bit deeper, presenting an argument for why you are a good fit for this position, presenting evidence straight from your experiences and skills. So it takes elements of your resume, but it isn't just a copy and paste because you do go more into depth as to why your experiences are a fit for this position. And then the cover letters don't need to be customized. It's actually just the opposite. They should be customized because not every role you will apply for is going to have or require the same skill set. And not all of your experiences will tailor to that position in the same way. So we're going to get into that as well. And then the other ones that we mentioned as to whether employers read them or not, before the resume, after, or alongside the resume. Again, it's not always consistent. They probably might read both, they might not read both, but this isn't something that's generalizable or something that should detain you from writing a cover letter or putting your best foot forward. Okay, and then here's what the agenda is going to look like today. We're going to start with the first point here, what a cover letter is and what it can do. Okay, so a cover letter is essentially a writing sample. As I mentioned before, I think the word fit here is the key point. So it's a chance to communicate your fit, focusing on examples, and we're tailoring each role in language drawn from the opportunity description. So when I'm applying to a specific role, it sometimes helps to have those responsibilities, the job posting open as I write my cover letter. So I can pull keywords from the job posting into my cover letter and make sure that I'm highlighting the skills that they're looking for. Here it says focusing on examples. So what I mean by that is, so if I want to talk about my communication skills, or if I want to talk about my technical abilities in relation to the job posting, I'm going to refer back to previous experiences or current experiences that I have that would relate to those skills. So for example, if I'm applying to a teaching position, in my cover letter, I might use the example of a tutoring position or a TA position that I had at Barnard and how I use those skills and how I plan to apply those skills to the job that I'm applying for. So it's going into the specifics of the jobs that you've had or the jobs that you have in order to make an argument as to why you would be a good fit for the position you're applying for. And then on the right-hand side here, we go into more detail. So showing that you're a strong candidate. As we like to say, show, don't tell. So show is where the examples come into play. Instead of saying, I'm a great writer, that is great, but you should give a little bit more detail using examples. So maybe you're a writing fellow, or maybe for a class, you wrote a really extensive and detailed research paper. Those are examples that you can pull from and go into depth. So that way you can present that argument without simply saying, I'm a great writer and this is why you should choose me. You're giving evidence for your statement. Again, the argument comes into play, connecting your experiences to one another, provoking thought, and then the part about showing that you've done your homework. So it is very obvious when a cover letter is tailored and when it's not. So it helps, again, to do your homework in the sense that you're reading the job posting, you're learning more about the organization that you're applying for, maybe even looking at their website, their mission, maybe even talking to alums or people in your network about the position, if you know someone, knowing the industry. So that showcases, hey, I've done my work. I know what I'm applying for. I know this organization. Because sometimes it's easy to tell when a cover letter was just taken from another position and applied to this one, because the tailoring part is really important. And then lastly, showcasing the capacity to communicate effectively and efficiently. So if you're able to produce a solid cover letter, it shows that you're good at collecting your thoughts and presenting them in a way that's clear. Okay, moving on, we're going to talk about the more visual aspect, what a cover letter should look like, and some of the main elements that comprise a cover letter. Okay, so here is what a cover letter looks like. I'm also going to move myself so you can see. So here is like the general layout of it. We start at the very top. The header at the top should mirror and match the header that you have for your resume. So your name, your institutional email address, your Barnard email address, your phone number, a LinkedIn, and then an optional location to let the employer know where you're based. As you can see, the margins should not be too small and they should be even throughout the whole cover letter. There should be a date at the top. So the date is usually the date that you either write it or the date that you upload the cover letter. And then the salutation should be dear, whoever it is. So sometimes job postings have a specific person they want you to direct your cover letter to, or they mention who the hiring manager is, but a lot of the time you may not know the person's exact name. So you can just write, as you will see in a later slide, dear hiring committee, dear hiring manager, keep it more broad, but not too vague. So using words like to whom it may concern may seem a little vague, a little more general, doesn't seem very tailored. So keeping that tip in mind is helpful. We usually start with an introduction and then moving on to a body paragraph or two and then a conclusion. And then as you can see, there's usually a signature at the end of it, and you sign off with your name. So sincerely, and then your name and a little signature to end things off. In the next few slides, we will talk about each component individually. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so now we're going to talk specifically about the heading. We mentioned this before. So same as your resume, it should mirror the resume. And then here are some tips at the very bottom to look into. So you don't have to give a full address. So you don't have to give your home address, Barnard's address. Some people like to give the location like New York, and then the zip code or wherever your hometown may be. But there's no need to give us the whole address with the street and the avenue and everything. So I mentioned this again, but I will repeat. So if no name is available on the job posting for who you should direct your cover letter to, you should just use hiring manager, members of the hiring team, hiring committee, in your salutation. And then third bullet point, so there's no need to tell us, oh, phone number and then phone number, or email and then email. You should just put the email on the phone number with no indication that it is a phone number or an email, if that makes sense. And then again, the reason why it's important to kind of mirror the header for resume and cover letter. It's just that it looks professional. It demonstrates that you took the time to kind of tailor your cover letter and mirror it to your resume. And it also just looks a lot cleaner when you, especially as an employer looking at both documents. So moving on to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to now start with the intro paragraph. So as I mentioned, a cover letter usually starts with an introduction and then has two body paragraphs, and then it has a conclusion. It's a lot like an essay, we like to say. And I know we all have experience writing argumentative essays, so just keeping in mind some of those elements can be helpful. Okay, so the intro paragraph is where you present your claim, very much like an essay, where you'll have like a thesis. So these bullet points at the bottom are really helpful to look at as well. So considering time, so if I only have 30 seconds, if I only have 15 seconds, I should be able to understand where your cover letter is going just from reading the first paragraph, especially reading the last sentence. The last sentence is where the thesis kind of comes into play, and that's where your main claim is stated. So the last bullet point is also important. So strong essays have clear claims that are established as quickly as possible to situate your reader in an argument. So usually, I think in the next slide, I might go into more detail. So we start off with why you're writing this letter. So I'm writing to apply for XYZ role. Some people like to state where they found the role. So I'm writing to apply to XYZ role as listed on Handshake, as listed on LinkedIn, or you can kind of mention that later on as well. And then your introduction. So I am a student at Barnard studying XYZ with an interest in XYZ. That's a place to state your major and then to state that you go to Barnard. So then the third bullet point, as it says, moving immediately to what draws you to the position, speaking specifically about the role. So here it's what draws me to XYZ and then why you were drawn. So you can mention like their mission or the workplace culture as the person does in this example. And then I think skipping right to the last sentence, which is the most important, as I mentioned. So giving us a claim as to why you're a strong fit. So here is where you'll mention specific skills. So this person mentions communications, marketing, writing. You can mention technical skills, collaborative skills. And then mentioning exactly what you will talk about in your body paragraphs. So here this person talks about their student organizations, their internships, and their coursework. So now I know as the reader that these are the things that we'll find in the body paragraphs. You can even be a little more specific and mention exactly what you're going to talk about. So you can say like skills through which that I've developed through my work in XYZ organization and through my position as president in XYZ club. So that's just an example, but you can even list like the experiences. So again, the thesis will outline the body paragraphs. And again, the main point of a cover letter is tying skills to experiences and then tying those to the position. So that's why the thesis has to mention some sort of skill set and then how you develop the skill set. And then through your body paragraphs explaining more in depth the examples of the experiences and how they tie to the position you're applying to. So that's what we're going to go into in the next slide. So here's an example of a body paragraph. So again, the body paragraphs take the thesis and give more detail. So if in my thesis I talk about my internship or my work through student organizations or coursework, in the body paragraphs, I'm going to now go into detail giving examples as to how my skill set was acquired through this work or how my work is going to now relate to the job I'm applying for. And then this part highlighted in red is one of the most important. So we talked a lot about tailoring, and we tailor usually through mentioning the organization that we're applying to or company at least once in every paragraph. So here in this body paragraph, in my last line, I'm going to make sure that I mention how I'm going to connect these skills to the position. And I'm going to do that through mentioning the name. So Widget International in this case. So just remembering that tip to mention the company at least once in every paragraph, usually in the last sentence. And we see here how it's kind of split into your point and then followed by evidence. So the point telling us the positions that you've had in the past, giving us a little bit more detail, some of the work you've done, and then the evidence will be more like an example, going more into depth. Yes, but we usually recommend each body paragraph being a separate experience. So one paragraph can be your work through a student organization. Your second paragraph could be a previous internship you've had. But in this example, there is a little bit of like a combination. So here they talk about one internship position and then one student org position. As long as you make sure it's cohesive and that there's some kind of connection between the skill set and the experiences you're going to present. Okay, here's a really good point. So sometimes a lot of students feel like they don't really have experience to bring into a cover letter. But a lot of the time, your very own coursework can be part of your claim, as mentioned here. So if you took a class that you feel like is very relevant to the position you're applying to, you can totally mention it, as long as you present evidence for why it's related or why the skill set that you've gained would be applicable to the job position. So for example, this person's mentioning a biology class they've taken. So for example, maybe you've taken a psych class or a tech class that really developed some of your skills that you think you can bring to the table at this new job position. Coursework can totally be its own paragraph. But again, remembering to be more specific. So any projects, any research papers you've written, if you learned how to use software in that class, mentioning those specific details is really important. And then the bullet points down here. So the same general elements that you would for an internship or a student org, you can also apply to coursework. So same thing of having a main claim at the top, having evidence, and then making sure that the last sentence mentions the company name. Okay. And then again, last bullet point, coursework research is optional. But if you feel like it's substantive and that it presents a good argument, feel free to mention your coursework and your independent research. Okay, so here we're going to talk about the signing off. Some really important points here. So we mentioned how you usually say sincerely, your name with the little signature, and then a sentence or two where you mention, like your thanks for the opportunity, but also how you look forward to speaking more about the position. So let's start with the first bullet point. So again, concluding kind of brings us to the next step. And usually the next step after the application process where you submit all your documents and your information is an interview. And that helps when you present in your last line that you look forward to talking more about the opportunity. This kind of gives segue into the next step, which is the interview. And then the second bullet point. So we talk a lot about fit, right? But there's no need to repeatedly mention your fit like explicitly every single time, especially not in the conclusion, because it's already been demonstrated in the body paragraphs and your claim at the very top. So no need to, as it says, breathlessly express hope and belief here, because it says, you've already shown that through your body paragraphs. So similar to an essay where you kind of restate some claims, you can totally restate a claim, but just making sure you're not being too repetitive either. No need to use warm regards, very truly, usually sincerely is the way to go. And then signing it just humanizes it, shows that you wrote it, you're not a bot, you're not AI, that you actually took the time to write this cover letter. Okay, so we kind of talked about the visual standpoint. So now just some last tips to restate some of what was already said, but just some things for some takeaways. So the first one, being very realistic. So trying to mirror language that you would use in your regular life. So not being too exaggerated. So not saying I'm thrilled for a chance to speak about this further. I'm elated or I'm eager. Maybe I'm eager in some circumstances, but not making sure not to exaggerate or blow the cover letter out of proportion with language that's too fancy or too unrealistic. The second one, complimenting the organization is not necessary. So in the first body paragraph, you can, of course, mention, as we talked about, why you're interested in the position and what drew you to the company or the organization. But there's no need to kind of sugarcoat or talk about, oh, this organization is my dream organization. It's a really great organization. There's no need to do that just because that's kind of something they might just gloss over. What's more important is your argument and the tie between your experiences and skills to the position. And then the third one, we try to avoid the language surrounding dreams, beliefs, and hopes or passion. It's very normal to feel like expressing, that this is your dream, that you hope, that you have a very strong passion for a certain issue. But unfortunately, cover letters are not the place to do that. We like to say fit over passion. So I could be really passionate about something, but that does not necessarily tell the employer anything about my skill set or my experiences. And then fourth, there's a difference between name dropping and a genuine connection. So sometimes if people were referred or if people were told about an opportunity from somebody else, you can mention them like how you learned about the position. Maybe I did through Beyond Barnard or I did through a professor or a connection in my network. And that's okay. But name dropping isn't always helpful. And if you do choose to name drop, always make sure to ask permission. So if I learned about this position through my psych professor, I'm going to make sure to ask my professor that it's okay that I mention their name. And then if it's hard for you to write a letter, sometimes that says enough. So yes, of course, cover letters can be tricky to write because it does take some time to think through those experiences and how you're going to connect them. But if it was hard to write, maybe that's a good thing because it shows that you really took that time to humanize and you took that time to really go into detail about your experiences and then use specific examples. Okay, what's missing and why? So even though bullet points are used in resumes, you don't always see them used in cover letters. Strong writing on its own should help a reader understand your main claims, as it says. So trying to avoid bullet points, because your resume usually follows that format, but cover letters just stick to strong, direct writing and language. Links and cover letters. So the content of the cover letter itself is important, but if you feel like a link, maybe a link to a paper you wrote or a link to a website you've designed, if you feel like that is something you want to present, you want to include into your profile, you can find a way to do that. But as long as you're not taking away from like the actual writing in the cover letter. Considerations of length. So usually a cover letter is about a page, similar to a resume. But again, depending on the job description, sometimes they might invite you to write more. But as long as you use the space wisely, and again, as it says here, always with intention. So what happens when a cover letter isn't requested? So sometimes a job posting may not ask for a cover letter. They might just ask for a resume or a rec letter or a transcript. So here it says, ask whether you're able to say something meaningful. So they might have personal statements. I know a lot of applications have questions that they ask or ask you to write an essay or a personal statement, but don't explicitly ask for a cover letter. There are still areas, as the ones I just mentioned, where you can make the same argument for yourself and still talk about your previous experience in a way that is meaningful, right? So if I have to write a personal statement or an essay or answer short answer questions, I can still apply that same logic of my skill set, my experiences, and making sure I'm demonstrating an argument for my fit. Okay, and then the next point we're going to talk about is just some next steps to take away as we wrap up here. So the first bullet point, using the format outline to get started updating your document. So we discussed kind of what the format should look like, and using that format to kind of get you started can be helpful. Utilizing Handshake's library of resources, including the cover letter guide. So as you may or may not know, Handshake has a whole career center tab with resources that students can use. And one of those folders is specifically for cover letters. So in that folder, you'll find some tips, you'll find some sample cover letters you can use to kind of direct your writing. So utilizing that library can also be a good first step. Scheduling time with a peer career advisor like myself to get your cover letters reviewed. So as I mentioned, Beyond Barnard does offer many services for students, and one of them is through our peer career advisors. So if you make an appointment through Handshake also, you will be able to meet with a peer career advisor and get tailored help. So they will be able to look over your cover letter draft and make sure that you're set to apply to your job. Establish connections with industry professionals. So this one's just talking about kind of the networking aspect of the job world. So it doesn't hurt if you have someone in your network to talk to that you want to look over your cover letter or someone whose advice you want in writing the cover letter. You can definitely reach out. So a professor or anyone in your network, a former employer, taking advantage of those connections could be really helpful. And then lastly, just a plug for Beyond Barnard, but telling a friend about this presentation and being an advocate for using Beyond Barnard. So this may have been really helpful for you. So perhaps sharing it with a friend can make a difference in their job search and in their application process as well. Okay, so since this is a recording, we obviously cannot have the traditional question format, but feel free, as I said, to make appointments with our peer career advisors or to email Beyond Barnard at the email listed on this slide if you do run into any questions or if you want to know more about cover letters and other best practices. Thank you very much. Again, I'm Natalie, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.